It was one of the biggest crimes that committed in the century.
A crooked cop pulls off a bank job worth over $10 million.
He was talented, well organized, and incredibly intelligent.
He committed the perfect crime, then mocked authorities.
It's hard to describe the arrogance. He just figured he was untouchable.
Find out how he did it, next on Masterminds. Medford, Massachusetts. In the early 80s, this quiet suburb of Boston was booming.
People had jobs, people had money, people were spending money, people were making money.
There was a lot of money around, and there was a lot of money in the bank.
And the richest bank in Medford was Depositors Trust. Its security system was state-of-the-art.
The alarm is wired into both the alarm company and the police station. The vault has 18 inches of reinforced concrete.
There were massive time-lock steel doors. Inside was a safe and 1,000 double-key deposit boxes. The vault seemed impregnable. But on Memorial Day weekend, 1980, the unthinkable happened. Depositors Trust became the scene of the largest bank burglary in New England's history.
Come that Tuesday morning, the bank opened, and they opened up and said, "Oh my God, what happened here?"
$10 million in cash and jewels was gone. 1,000 armor-plated deposit boxes had been smashed open. The highly sophisticated silent alarm hadn't gone off, and the reinforced concrete ceiling had a hole blown through it.
It was incredibly bizarre. This is the type of a job you see in Hollywood. That's the type of crime this was.
The FBI was immediately notified and had jurisdiction over the crime scene. They did an extensive investigation.
There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, and no burglary tools.
Well, there was no evidence because they had been so careful about covering their tracks. They had made sure that anything that went into the bank came out with them. In that sense, it was the perfect crime. It's an immediate big story, and it's not just a big story at the Medford level. It's a big story at the state level and at the federal level.
The question then arose as to who were the suspects and who could have possibly perpetrated a job of this magnitude. But there was really no prime suspects at that point, other than the fact that it had to be a bunch of professionals.
The gang was led by a professional police officer, Captain Jerry Clemente. A career cop obsessed with money and power had pulled off a multi-million-dollar heist. The question is, how did he do it? Police Captain Jerry Clemente is the mastermind behind a $10 million heist at the Medford, Massachusetts Depositors Trust. The burglary is the climax of years of corruption that started with his first night on the force, when he was partnered with a veteran cop named Crusher.
They were going through Medford, and they saw this guy running down the street holding a stolen lawn chair.
To Jerry's surprise, Crusher knows the thief.
He turned out to be another cop. The guy picks up the lawn chair, goes away. Crusher says to Jerry, two things, Jerry. Number one, if you see a cop with a television, piece of furniture, anything at all, mind your own business. Whatever he's doing is his business. Number two, don't play high and mighty. The lesson he learned was corruption was accepted. It was easy to move beyond that, almost imperceptibly, to a point where you were doing wholesale corrupt activities.
Jerry quickly discovers he has a talent for planning and executing burglaries. He furnishes his entire house with stolen goods. But he's also a brave cop. Early in his career, Clemente is awarded a Medal of Valor for his role in the takedown of an armed gangster.
He had a good reputation in law enforcement circles. You know, he was a good guy, solid guy, you know, a go-to guy.
But his double life as criminal and crime fighter soon spills over into his personal affairs.
Here's a married man with a family living, you know, a happily married life in a community on the surface, who at the same time is having a clandestine sexual affair. So it certainly must have been part of Jerry's makeup to want to lead a double life.
As Clemente moves up through the ranks of law enforcement, he's drawn to more ambitious crimes. He partners with Sergeant Tom Doherty.
Tom Doherty was always a rogue. He was arrogant, out of control, and basically abused his badge from probably the first day he wore it.
In 1978, Clemente and Doherty pull their first big job. The target? The police department.
They would steal the police promotion exam before it was given, make copies of it, sell it for $5,000 to somebody who wanted to be a police chief someplace. They manipulated and controlled who they wanted in command positions in the city and town police departments. They were very powerful back at that time, very powerful. And Jerry Clemente was at the top of it.
Then in 1980, Clemente and Doherty see an opportunity to become multi-millionaires. They decide to hit Depositors Trust.
They both knew in the back of their minds that this was the big score. This was, of all the planned criminal activities that they were involved in, this was the one that was going to set them up for life. Because Tommy had his own safety deposit box in the bank, he was able to go in and case the place. While he was in there, he mentally paced off the dimensions of the vault, noted, you know, where the safes were, where the deposit boxes were.
Based on this information, Clemente knows he needs a specialized team to pull off the job. He recruits fellow crooked cop Joe Bangs and a gangster known as Brother O'Leary.
They were going to have to bypass the alarm, so they needed an alarm guy, and that was Bucky Barrett.
Bucky Barrett was, by all accounts, an expert at alarms and was, by all accounts, a professional burglar.
The alarm was a major obstacle that the gang had to get over because it was wired into both the Medford police station and to the alarm company. And it was a silent alarm. So if you triggered it at the bank, you wouldn't know that it had gone off.
Bucky realizes he'll have to bypass the alarm using sophisticated electronics. He assembles a device to block the outgoing signal. For 2 months, Clemente and Bucky Barrett return to the bank each night to test every wire.
He had to test each wire individually to figure out which was the alarm wire so he could set up the bypass box and disable the alarm.
Jerry also makes reconnaissance patrols.
They made dry runs, staked out the bank, much the way police officers would stake out an alleged scene of a crime. I mean, they staked out their scene of the crime.
Confident it's a go, Clemente now sets a date for the heist, the Memorial Day weekend.
During Memorial Day weekend in 1980, there were a number of public events going on, including a carnival, a lot of noise, a lot of commotion into the late night hours. That really worked very well for the conspirators.
The team now makes final preparations.
They had acetylene torches, they had dynamite, they had special magnesium burning rods, carbide core bits for the drills. Everything that they needed for any eventuality, they had prepared carefully ahead of time.
The night of the burglary, the gang moves into position. Clemente is confident he won't be discovered because his lookout man is the senior cop on duty for the entire city of Medford, Tommy Doherty.
If anybody did come along, he'd be able to make sure they moved on, or if they came too close, he could tell them to go away because he was, after all, a police officer.
With everything in place, Clemente sets his plan in motion.
The steps of the burglary began with them bypassing the alarm system at the rear of the building. After that was accomplished, Jerry Clemente picked the lock to the shop next door, which gave them access to the upper loft area.
Inside the shop's attic, they break through the wall leading to the bank.
That wall was made of cinder blocks. So in a matter of minutes, they had smashed through there. They were able to crawl into the crawl space above the vault.
So they then could start the tunnels through the actual ceiling of the vault.
Using power from a nearby fuse box, they start to drill through the vault ceiling.
And they knew exactly where to drill in order to create the hole, from Tommy having mentally cased the place.
You know, the old story, plan your work your plan. Everything was done exact to a T. They knew what they had to do. They were all disciplined guys.
At each step of the way, they would pause and wait, report back to Tommy. Tommy would make sure that nobody had heard anything, that nothing was being reported. He'd have a good look around. Then he'd give them the okay to go on to the next stage of the operation.
But an hour into the job, there's a big problem. Doherty radios Clemente to shut everything down and keep quiet. The owners of Brigham's restaurant next to the bank have come to take inventory. Clemente has Doherty spring into action.
Tommy went in, told these people, I'm sorry, we've had some, criminal activity around here lately. We really can't have you doing inventory in the middle of the night, and got them to leave and go home.
And they were quite impressed that, geez, great police response here.
Doherty gives Clemente the all clear. Above the vault, the men resume working on the 18 inches of steel-reinforced concrete. Clemente has brought dynamite, but he knows he's taking a risk.
The risk obviously being they're in the middle of a downtown area in Medford, that would be heard by the neighbors and that they would be discovered.
They pile sandbags on the dynamite to direct the blast downward and muffle the sound.
As it happens, nobody reported any sound. It's possible that people heard a loud bang, but maybe they thought it was revelry from the carnival.
The explosives were able to dislodge the concrete, but it still left the wire mesh that had to be cut with an acetylene torch.
It's hot, time-consuming work, but by 3 a.m. they break through the vault ceiling.
So when they dropped down into the vault, they had all of this debris all over the place and all of this dust floating in the air.
Their main target is the safe.
At the rear of the vault was a larger safe which the bank used for their cash for their customers.
Bucky sets to work with an acetylene torch. O'Leary and Bangs start prying open the safety deposit boxes. It takes an hour to cut through the safe's hinges.
Bucky opens the safe. There's only 60 grand. They're all incredibly disappointed. Months of preparation, careful planning, high risk, incredible expectations, and they're sitting there with $60,000.
Unfortunately, they found a very small amount of cash, principally because it was Memorial Day weekend and most of the cash had already been removed by the bank employees and sent to the Federal Reserve for the weekend.
There's nothing more Jerry can do. They've run out of time.
It's in May, so there's an early dawn, and they got to be out of there before it gets light. It's not turning out exactly the way that they thought it would, so they'll go back to Joe's house. So Jerry says, well, we've got 2 more nights to come back in and to go through and break open as many of these safety deposit boxes as we can.
Had this been your typical burglars, they would never have risked going back the second and third night. But Jerry Clemente knew that with 3 active police officers involved in this conspiracy, they had an absolute control over preventing anyone from law enforcement ever detecting that they were inside that vault.
Back in the vault, they set to work on the safety deposit boxes. But the problem is, it's taking 15 minutes to open each one.
Initially, they were breaking through these cylinder locks by manually using a screwdriver and breaking out these cylinder locks. They found that took an inordinate amount of time.
So then he discovered this new method, which was basically to use the chisel and hammer to break off the hinges.
It was much faster. It enabled them to open more doors in a quicker way.
Over the next 2 nights, the gang uses this new method to break into 1,000 deposit boxes and empty the vault.
So there was close to $2 million in cash, but there was also pink diamonds, rare jewels, ordinary diamonds, expensive watches.
They were lugging so much stuff out of there, they were exhausted, and they were doing it under the protection of the police. It's frightening. They were the police.
72 hours after breaking into the vault, Clemente and his crew escape with $10 million in cash and jewels.
Well, the first thing they did is they split the cash 6 ways. So they all got their take of the cash, which was about 200 grand apiece.
But dividing the jewelry is much more difficult.
The problem was then jewelry is identifiable, and they had a problem of how could they get rid of it and convert that into cash.
Clemente decides to leave it with Joe Banks. Now all he has to do is wait, and he and his crew will be very rich. But this treasure will set one gang member against another and threatens to destroy them all. Jerry Clemente and his crew of crooked cops have pulled off a brilliantly planned bank burglary, netting more than $10 million in cash and jewels.
When the bank manager came in on Tuesday morning, he found on the floor of the vault papers in empty boxes between knee-deep and 4 feet high. One of the people who came to protect the scene until the FBI arrived was Sergeant Thomas Doherty.
The robbery's lookout man is now a spy inside the investigation. Doherty keeps Clemente informed of FBI progress.
The speculation was there had to be an insider involved, there had to be someone with local knowledge. A number of people were interviewed, including Tom Doherty, Jerry Clemente, both of whom were on duty during part of that weekend. But while there was a lot of speculation and rumor that Jerry Clemente was, in fact, the mastermind, there was no physical evidence connecting him to the burglary.
When investigators try to shake Clemente's alibi, his mistress, Barbara Hickey, backs him up.
He instructed her that if she were asked where he was on those nights, that she was to say that he was with her for the entire night.
Knowing authorities have nothing concrete, Clemente stonewalls.
The fact that Jerry is a captain in the police department means that he understands police procedure. He understands the rules of evidence. He knows what it is that they need in order to prove that he did it. He also knows that they can't put it together. So he feels that even though they have strong suspicions, and even though they can make life difficult for him, that he's in the clear.
The FBI continues to investigate. They put Clemente under 24-hour surveillance, but Clemente knows he's being watched.
Without knowing the guy, it's hard to describe the arrogance. He just figured he was untouchable. They had thrown everything they had at him, and he walked away.
As the case against him grows cold, Clemente lies low, waiting for the statute of limitations to run out.
Jerry's very conscious that at this stage, they have less than a year to go, and they're home and dry in the Depositors Trust heist.
The clock was ticking, and honestly, unless something happened, this was going to be an unsolved crime.
But just as police are about to abandon the investigation, Clemente is hit with a crisis. Tommy Doherty and Joe Bangs start spinning out of control.
They're both using cocaine heavily. They're both incredibly paranoid.
And soon the friction between them with the freebase and being paranoid, and they also started to think one of them might be dropping a dime on the other, and that's when the whole ball started rolling down the hill.
All of a sudden, guns are out, and Joe Bangs gets shot. It's the worst thing that could have happened. One, that Tommy shot him. Two, that he didn't kill him, because it just brought total chaos to their whole operation.
The state cops arrive to investigate the shooting. They find drugs and jewelry in Joe Bangs' car.
That jewelry allowed a clear link to be made between Joe and the Depositors Trust heist. And it allowed the police to put pressure on Joe.
With police leaning on one gang member and another in jail, Jerry Clemente is facing the greatest threat of his criminal career.
So his life is basically turned upside down. But he knew that if he just kept his cool, and that if the others kept their cool, that they couldn't be broken.
With the discovery of the stolen jewelry, police are determined to bring down Clemente and his gang.
The adrenaline gets fired up a little more. And it's one of the biggest crimes that committed in the century. I mean, these are bad cops. If you're bad cops, you want to get them.
While authorities build their case against Clemente, Tommy Doherty goes on trial for the shooting of Joe Bangs. Doherty's lawyer presses Bangs about the jewelry found in his car.
Isn't it true, Mr. Bangs, that you had a kilo of cocaine in the trunk of your car? Yes, it is. And isn't it true that you had some jewelry in the trunk of your car? Yes, it is. And I suppose that jewelry was stolen, too. Bangs responded. He finally had it. He goes, yes, sir. It was stolen jewelry. I stole it with your defendant on Memorial Day weekend, 1980. And the whole court went into an uproar. It was the biggest break that came along on it.
Doherty is found guilty, and Joe Bangs tells prosecutors everything about the depositor's trust heist. But police need more.
Joe Bangs carried a lot of baggage and had very low credibility. The problem we faced is that a jury would say, you're only saying this and implicating others because you want to save your own skin.
Investigators then get a break when they learn Clemente has left his mistress, Barbara Hickey.
They were working with her and working with her and working with her, and they were getting nowhere with her, none at all. And so they were kind of throwing up their hands and turning to leave when she said to him, well, I don't know if this helps, but would it make any difference that he came home one night that weekend loaded with dust and dirt all over him? If that make cement powder and that type of thing, would that be helpful to you?
For Jerry Clemente, Barbara Hickey's turning on the gang is the worst thing that could possibly happen. It brings down the whole house of cards.
Jerry Clemente is arrested and charged with 4 counts of breaking and entering with intent to commit a felony. Although the evidence against him is strong, he's unconcerned, continuing to believe he's pulled off the perfect heist.
Jerry was always super confident. He always had faith in his ability to get out of any situation that he might find himself in. He knew how to cover his tracks, he knew how to make sure that the right people were involved, and he knew how to make sure that when it came down to it, the odds were stacked in his favor.
He was an intelligent, articulate guy. He had spent a lot of time planning and preparing for this burglary, and yet I think to the end never believed that the government would be able to prove and have a jury believe and convict him of the crime.
But at his trial, his former mistress, Barbara Hickey, is the prosecution's star witness.
Out of a clear blue sky, he said that he was going to have a lot of money and he would never have to work a day in his life again.
Her testimony finally puts the corrupt cop behind bars.
Jerry got 30 to 40 years, so it was the maximum sentence, and they nailed it.
It's particularly satisfying when it's a police officer and you realize that this is someone who had corrupted the system, who had breached his trust, and who should be brought to justice.
After 10 years in jail, Jerry Clemente is paroled. He is currently without a job and is fighting for his police pension.
I know.